The Pentagon released this map hours after 59 Tomahawk missiles were unleashed on the Syrian airbase where the chemical weapons-carrying plane had reportedly originated from.
There is no doubt in our minds, and the information we have supports, that Syria, the Syrian regime under the leadership of President Bashar al-Assad, are responsible for this attack. And I think further it is very important that the Russian government consider carefully their continued support for the Assad regime.
Russia is supposed to have removed all the chemical weapons from Syria, but obviously that has not happened, as innocent Syrians continue to be murdered in chemical attacks. Let's think about the possible reasons for Russia's failure. It could be that Russia is knowingly allowing chemical weapons to remain in Syria.
Now, officials are taking it one step further as they look into whether the Russians may have played a part in the chemical attack. The Boston Globe reports, on Friday, senior U.S. military officials said a drone belonging to either Russia or Syria was seen hovering over the site of the chemical weapons attack after the assault earlier this week. Of course, anyone paying attention to the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime's opposition is leery of the Pentagon's evidence, especially since previous evidence points yet again to American ally Saudi Arabia. Foreign Policy Initiative reported as early as June 2012, the New York Times spoke with unnamed U.S. and Arab intelligence officials who said that Saudi Arabia, along with Turkey and Qatar, was paying for weapons being funneled through secret channels to Syrian rebel fighters. In February 2013, the Times reported sizable small arms shipments that Saudi Arabia financed and through third parties provided to anti-Assad fighters in Syria. Notably, this material support was directed towards nationalist, moderate Islamist, or secular groups, largely under the banner of the Free Syrian Army.
We might not have much of a job here today because I looked at the New York Times to find out, to get the explanation, and they said, worst chemical attack in years in Syria. U.S. blames Assad. So it's all over and done with. But not quite so easy, is it? What happened 4 years ago in 2013, this whole thing about crossing the red line, and ever since then, the neocons have been yelling and screaming. Even part of the administration is still yelling and screaming about Assad using poison gases on his people 4 years ago. Not quite true. Who would benefit? It makes no sense, even if you were totally separate from this and take no sides of this, and you were just an analyst. It doesn't make any sense for Assad under these conditions to all of a sudden use poison gases. It's zero. I think it's zero chance that he would have done this, deliberately.
Saudi Arabia was connected to a nerve gas attack using mortars. Their Wahhabists wanted to be rock stars, though, so they videotaped themselves launching the chemical attacks, gibbering about it, and uploaded it the same day.
We have a number of instances where ISIL has used chemical munitions on the battlefield.
In 2012, the Syrian government was warning that the rebels could resort to chemical attacks after al-Nusra stole 200 tons of toxic chlorine from a factory in Aleppo. In 2013, 12 members of al-Nusra were arrested with 2 cylinders of sarin gas.
A lot of the reports are coming from the so-called White Helmets NGO, which is George Soros funded. It's receiving UK and US tax dollars, and they've been filmed carrying Al-Qaeda flags around, taking part in executions, hanging out with the child beheaders of the Nur al-Zinki group, one of the rebel groups that the CIA vetted and gave weapons to, which ended up beheading a child. The White Helmets, as we now know very clearly, are the same individuals that are with Al-Qaeda. They just put on a white helmet and suddenly they're no longer Al-Qaeda.
In 2014, the US and Russia implemented an agreement to destroy the Syrian government's stockpile of chemical weapons. The BBC writes, the destruction of the arsenal began on 6th of October, overseen by the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. On the 31st of October, the international watchdog confirmed that Syria's declared equipment equipment for producing, mixing, and filling chemical weapons had been destroyed. The full-blown reality is the chemical weapons attacks in Syria aren't going to stop, even if Assad is ousted, ignoring the well-known role of Saudi Arabian support for a network of anti-Assad rebels capable of stockpiling their own chemical weapons is equivalent to a dog chasing its tail.
So let's say we get Assad and they get regime change. Assad's gone and now there's going to be a new government. Who will that government be? One of the leaders of the Islamic Army, which was one of the many, many different groups fighting against Assad, trained in Damascus at a Wahhabist, radical Islamic, preacher-infested university funded by the Saudis. Do we really think he was going to be better than Assad? There are 2 million Christians in Syria protected by Assad. In fact, the Christians that were in Iraq so hated the war and so hated the government that we helped institute upon them, they all fled, went to Syria.
But now that you've got Donald Trump, they can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. One, if they can get Donald Trump to start World War III, then they can blame him for it. And suddenly it's not a globalist puppet that has to take the blame, that has to get up on television and explain away this.
Yes.
They know that they can destroy Donald Trump and his entire supporters and label them as the people who started World War III.
John Bound for Infowars.com.